Right, it's about time to go through some of our business headlines now. And joining us is Alfie Stirling, the Director of Research and the Chief Economist, at the New Economics Foundation. Good morning, Alfie. How are you?
Morning, James. All well, thanks.
Lovely stuff. Should we start by going through this one then? Thousands of Swissport jobs at risk despite rescue being in the bag.
That's right, yeah. So this is the story. Swissport, who are an airport baggage handler, who employ about 7,000 people across the UK at different airports. And, you know, because of the collapse in demand for air passenger travel, we're now seeing about 3,500 to 4,000 jobs employed by Swissport, you know, in airports like Gatwick, Heathrow in the UK, now at risk. And actually, this is the tip of an iceberg. Swissport, in and of itself, is quite a successful company. It's quite a large company, and it's recently negotiated a refinancing plan, which may keep much of its business open. But actually, other airport baggage handlers, other industries associated with aviation, all face risks at the moment, with up to 70,000 jobs at risk across the UK in the aviation sector.
Yeah, it's just another example, isn't it, Alfie, of more problems for this sector, isn't it?
That's right. I mean, I think aviation was already facing a double headwind, actually. So we know that since 2008, job numbers have been falling in aviation, even though passenger numbers recovered quite quickly. And that's because of technological change, automation, many jobs switching over to being digitized. But also we know that climate change, you know, the Paris Agreement set by a number of major economies and countries internationally means that the trajectory of passenger numbers is to fall over time as well. And those combinations was already providing a pressure for aviation. And of course, as we all know, the pandemic now has provided an extra pressure on top of that, with passengers either not able to fly because of regulations restricting movement, or else unwilling because of the risks they now perceive to be associated.
Yes, let's move on then and talk about the self-employed, Alfie. They're still finding it very difficult, aren't they? The Times reports this morning how the virus has left millions of Britons unable to access emergency support.
That's right, and this, you know, the really heartbreaking stories really here with, you know, many people who, you know, are not on strong incomes before the crisis, finding themselves with a lack of support since the crisis has now taken hold. And that's because government has actually done quite a lot in this case to try and support the unemployed, more than they would do usually. So the self-employed now have new rights to receive income from universal credit. They also have the self-employed income protection scheme, which allows some self-employed to receive an income to compensate for lost earnings during the crisis. But unfortunately, both have been actually widely seen as inadequate. So universal credit is still one of the weakest social security systems in Northwest Europe. So that's the UK's safety net has been one of the weakest internationally. It's also incredibly weak by the UK's own historical standards as well. And the problem with the self-employed income protection scheme primarily has been that if you're newly self-employed, so if you became self-employed in the last 12 months, or if you have a mixture of income from earnings, from work and self-employment, there's a high chance you might miss out from any protection at all, which is causing a really serious issue for poverty in the UK at the moment.
That's the key point there, isn't it, Alfie? There's so many different forms of self-employed. And does that make it tricky of course it makes it tricky for the government, I suppose. But also, do you think they still need to do more, though, to try and support people? Because not everyone is in the same bracket on this at all.
So I think the answer is yes, it makes it tricky, and yes, they absolutely should be doing more. The approach so far has to be to try to establish bespoke self-employment schemes that have been more focused on trying to avoid fraud or evasion, fraudulent claims to self-employed income protection, rather than thinking about how do you reach the highest number of people most effectively. And actually, if you look at other countries, the most effective way to provide a safety net for the self-employed is to strengthen your general unemployment benefit. So if universal credit was more generous, had greater access from the self-employed, that would actually help in a huge way reach the people that are currently missed out. Now, that has to come as well with higher contributions from the self-employed, who currently pay a little bit less national insurance, for example, than employees. But I think that's a price worth paying to make sure that during a crisis, their risks, the risk of the self-employed, are pooled and protected by government, just in the way that employees are as well.
Absolutely. And finally then, Alfie, let's talk about something that ended officially yesterday. Eat Out to Help Out.
That's right. I mean, this is a scheme that actually, in the end, I was impressed with the amount of take up and cut through it had. It was about on par with what the government expected, with 60 odd million meals and counting. It's about 500 million increase in demand. People have really taken with it, and actually companies, I think the most impressive element, some companies are now considering extending the scheme into September of their own accord. I think the problem, though, in the round is that all along this was a bit of a policy gimmick, great publicity for the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, but actually it's only a drop in the ocean in terms of what's actually needed. We're talking about here about £500 million injected to the UK hospitality sector, when we know actually across the economy as a whole, we've got a missing stimulus and a missing amount of spending from the economy of about £90 billion a year. So that's a huge difference. It's a world difference between what the government has put in so far. I think the other issue as well is that much of the extra meals that have been eaten during Monday to Wednesday, many of them being moved from other parts of the week, but also perhaps less discussed that what we don't know is how many people ate out in August but won't eat out now in September because they see it as eating out a bit more in August and now will distance themselves yet again. So that remains to be seen, but certainly concerns that the scheme's impact may not be sufficient.
Well, absolutely, because obviously, we're heading into sort of the autumn and the winter months now. It's going to be harder, isn't it, surely? In a way, this ending, it could be, quite damaging for the business world.
That's right. And really, I think this links back actually similar way to the Swissport story, because at the end of the day, government needs to ensure that there's support in place for industries that we know are going to be viable at some point in the future. We're going to have travel of some kind, whether it's aviation or not, and there'll need to be supporting industries there. We know that hospitality is not going to disappear because of COVID. It may need to adjust and change, but in 12 months' time, or whenever the pandemic is beginning to come under proper control, we will want to have pubs and restaurants back open. And actually, I think the analysis is that government needs to be thinking about not just a blanket extension of the furlough scheme, which is due to end in October, but thinking about smart ways in which it could be targeted, either at particular industries to ensure that support remains in place where it's needed, or to ensure that when there's local lockdowns, workers from all industries have something to lean back on. And when government asks them to socially isolate to protect the population, government's there to protect them as well.